Welcome to the Pillars of Leadership podcast. Today I'm with Tom Freiling, and Tom and I go way back, almost 22 years. He published my first book, and the publishing was a masterpiece. I'll say that. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate all you did there. Welcome to the show, by the way.
Hey, thanks for having me. It is great to reconnect. You reached out to me a few weeks ago, and I hadn't heard from you for many years, so it was wonderful to hear back, and I'm happy to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, you've had an interesting background, not only an author of six books, but a publisher, and you've published thousands of books. And we can talk a little bit about your company. I want to make sure people know about it because you did an amazing job for me when you did my work. And so you've got a great company there, a great culture, a great business. You have focused a lot on faith and business and culture and health. Um, you also have done some writing for Entrepreneur Magazine and Fast Company Magazine, I believe.
And also Forbes. I started writing. I've been a publisher for many years, and I've written books, but I didn't start writing articles and such for business magazines till just recently, actually. So that's also been fun for me.
Great. Well, your main role, obviously, CEO at Freiling Publishing. You founded Zulon Press, which is where you published one of my books. One of your books, Reagan's God and Country, was placed in the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library Museum. Did I catch that correctly?
That's correct. Yep.
What an honor. And I think there's a new movie coming out. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
I've not seen it. I'm not even sure if it's out yet. I've seen advertisements for it, so I want to see it though. Looks great.
Great. Well, and did I miss anything in your background that you want to highlight or bring attention to?
No, I don't think so. I've been publishing books as a business. That's been my business for many, many years. So, but I've been an entrepreneur and worked for myself for the better part of 25 years now. So, um, having published books for a long time, I'm very familiar with that industry and such, but also super familiar with what it means to be an entrepreneur and a business owner.
And I want to talk about that today too, because I know CEOs go through a lot of challenge and stress, and you might be able to shed some light on some issues and share some of your personal experiences. Curious, what brought you into writing and publishing? Has that always been how you've been built?
It was really by accident. It was the first job I took out of college many years ago as a telemarketer for a book publisher, and this was back in the days when you'd sell things by phone, and we could call bookstores, talk to the bookstore owner. They would order books right over the phone. That's how books were sold from publisher to retail back in the day. So I was really by accident, but I've always loved books. And it's been a great career. It's been a great adventure. Feel blessed to have fallen into it by accident. But of course, there's been a lot of intentionality through the years since that point.
What would you say was the one biggest challenge that you've had to go through in that process? Because you think of writing and it sounds so relaxing and freeing, and then you think of owning your own business and being responsible for the financials of that, and that you've impacted literally millions of lives with the books that have been published, and so there's got to be some stress and pressure that's come along with that. But what's the one biggest challenge you've had to go through, and how did you deal with it?
Um, that's a great question. The biggest challenge was and still is the pace at which publishing has changed over the years. It is a lot different now than it was 20 years ago when I published your book, both in terms of who's printing books, how books are printed, how books are distributed, how books are sold. There are many parties involved in the publishing of a single book. And so a publisher is dependent upon many different individuals and other companies to pull it all together and make it happen. Well, there's been so much change over the years. I would say the most difficult thing has been to keep up with the change, right?
Mm,
And to make sure you're working with the right people and understand and leverage the most recent technology that's available. And there's really no end in the change, it just keeps on
mhm.
changing. So it's not simple in that way, I would say. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. I
Okay.
mean, publishing's like any other business. You're always going to have problems with human resource. You'll always have problems with capital and cash. You'll always have problems with a vendor. We're no different than anybody else in that way, in any other business. So yeah, and I've had challenges and struggles in all of those areas, through the
Mhm.
years, just like any other founder or owner.
How have you had to deal with, that growth and becoming an expert? Because when you're CEO, you're the master of everything. You're in charge of everything. And so we were talking earlier just about the concept of outsourcing and how much to do yourself versus how much to entrust with someone else. Is that a difficult process as a CEO leader? Because usually you think, well, I can do it all myself, and I don't like delegating, or I want
Mhm.
to own it. I want to control it. Was that a
Yeah.
challenge at all?
I mean, it's a challenge for me. I am kind of a do-it-yourselfer by nature. I don't think I'm a great delegator, but I don't think a lot of founders are. Um, Primarily because in the early stages of a business, of a small business, you have to do
Hmm.
everything or a lot of things by yourself. So you're switching hats all day long, right? And you become accustomed to doing that, and you develop a deep knowledge of many different parts of your business. So sometimes, well, if you grow, at some point you do have to bring new people on board to help you, but it is important to learn to delegate and let go in certain areas. But I do think it's a challenge for most entrepreneurs. Um, and in publishing, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of organization needed. And in that way, it is challenging to do it by yourself, but it's also challenging to manage other people, doing all of that in unison. I think they're equally as challenging.
Yeah.
But if you're going to grow, you have to hire staff. There's no two ways about it. You have to. So and I think I've probably learned many lessons along the way. Back when I published Yearbook at Zulon Press, that company was growing by leaps and bounds, and we were probably adding a new staff person every month
Mm.
for a few years. So we were constantly interviewing, hiring, reorganizing the team. And that was a huge challenge. And, made a lot of mistakes, learned a lot of lessons during
Yeah.
that period. I feel blessed that it was successful. And when I look back at it now, I scratch my head and wonder how I pulled it off, actually. So it was by God's grace most of the time.
Yeah, that's usually the case. So, yeah, I did a lengthy study on delegation and why CEOs do delegate and why they don't delegate. And it's interesting because oftentimes people will want to delegate first what they don't like. And that may or may not be the right thing. It may be you can get the most benefit by delegating something to a greater subject matter expert in picking something that you love to do, and you're not getting the bang for the buck. Some people just love cold calling and glad handing and want to do it themselves because they enjoy it, and they're maybe good at it, but you may not be getting the most bang for the buck for that. So I think it's important to do that analysis and to look at what to delegate and when to delegate. It is hard when you're a startup making those decisions, and because you may not have any money. It may be all your own money, and there is no profit. There are no margins at this point. So anything you outsource is something you could have done free.
Yeah, that's very true. That's great insight. And I would agree with you that but it's probably only natural that you're going to work on those things that you like working on. That's probably natural. So I suppose it's really a question of being intentional about that and maybe thinking it through a little bit, right? And not doing the first thing that you want to do because you want to do it. So you got to think about the health of the business, what's going to move the business forward.
Yeah. You had we had kind of talked about the topic for if there was a specific topic we wanted to cover. And the one we both came up with was this concept of it's lonely at the top. And there is data to prove that. I went and looked at it after you brought it up as a topic, and Harvard Business Review did a recent study that 70% of CEOs feel lonely. And if you look at the normal employee base, it's only 20%. So 3.5 times more. And you would think, they're surrounded by people and they're networking with customers and suppliers and family, more time with the family. And it's just not true. And 61% of those CEOs said it was impacting their performance, this loneliness. And over half, 52% said it was impacting their decision making. So, the data goes to show that, but you as a CEO, have you lived that at all? And it's not something that you want to go public with necessarily and say, I am just one, what did Steve Martin say? Wild and crazy. I'm just one lonely and depressed guy. It's have you gone through that? Is it
Oh, yeah.
consistent, persistent?
I'm happy to be public about that. It's true. It's true. It's a fact. And I think it's something that I don't think I fully realized it really until a few years ago. But when I did realize it and began to really think it through, it helped me a lot. There's a lot of reasons for it. You need more than 10 fingers to count the reasons, I think. I do think it's prevalent. I think that most founders or CEOs, I don't think they feel like they can be honest with very many people about their life or their business. You can't always be honest with staff for many reasons. One thing I learned as a founder is if things are going really, really well and the business is growing by leaps and bounds and everything looks great and the financials look great, you can't always, it's not always best to share that with the
Right.
team. And then vice versa, if things are going really poorly, you can't always share all that with the team either, right? There's consequences to that, both in terms of morale and the such. So I do think most CEOs feel like they can't share much, honestly, with very many people. And of course, that's going to result in a lonely feeling, right? If you got it all wrapped up inside of you and you can't tell anybody. So I think that's an issue. I think probably most CEOs don't feel like their staff is entirely honest with them either.
Right.
And nor can they be all the time. So they might be their colleagues and their friends, many of them in one way or another, but they're not the same kind of friend that you might have outside of the business where, two people come together and completely honest with each other about things. So I think that's one of the reasons, why CEOs feel lonely. I also feel that most CEOs feel beat up. They're beat up by their own staff. They're beat up by vendors. They're beat up by customers. So there's a lot of negative, right? A lot of negativity coming to them every day. There's more negativity than positivity, generally speaking. The owner never wins the Employee of the Month award, right? So they're not getting a lot of pats on the back, in general. So I think that's another reason. And then I think what happens over time is you kind of hold yourself up. You kind of build your little silo, and you avoid conversations. You avoid real communication, real relationship with people because you don't want to have to deal with it, right? But that's a vicious circle because then you're even more alone. You're more lonely because you're not even trying to communicate with people anymore. You might walk into your office, shut the door, open your laptop, and spend the whole day looking at spreadsheets or, looking at ESPN or something. But the last thing you want to do is communicate with people because you feel like that's just going to make things worse, right? And that's where I think people really get into trouble is when they just stop trying. Um, so I think it's a serious problem. I think it's a serious issue. And when I mention it to other CEOs, founders, small business owners, yeah, I get unanimous agreement that that's how they feel.
So how do you deal? What are some of the solutions? I know it's a problem and an issue, and yet, um, the CEO doesn't have any extra time laying around,
Yeah.
for the most part. A lot of men, tend to not have close friends, statistically more so than women, whereas women may have a confidant, that they can share things. So there is a difference there in how men are built versus women in some cases, not all cases.
Mhm.
So, there's some of the obvious things like, are you part of a church? Are you part of a small group? Those things. But again, is that part of a solution set or
I think it is. I think that the biggest mistake that CEOs will make is to stop communicating entirely, stop having intentional relationships, either inside or outside of work. I'm not saying it's a magic wand, but if you don't try, you're going to be lonely. If you're alone, you're going to be lonely. So I do think it's really important to somehow, some way, find and establish some relationships with some people that you can be honest with. So whether that's at church, whether that's in a community group, a small group of other CEOs, something like that, it's going to help, I also think it's important to accept the role. I think what happens sometimes is you start almost regretting, complaining to yourself and maybe others how hard it is to be the guy in charge, right? And that's also a vicious circle, right? Because when you start speaking it out, then you believe it. You believe your own words. So I do think there's an element of accepting the role, and I think that's where I finally got to at one point was accepting it. And when you wake up in the morning, accept it and tell yourself you're going to meet the challenge. It's a tough job, and I think it's super important to tell yourself that.
Mhm.
Um, there's something about acceptance, I think, that kind of changes your perspective, right? Leadership is hard. And if you don't want to be a leader, then don't be a leader. It's probably best just to get out of that role, sell the business, go get a quote unquote real job. Um, but I don't think many of us really want to do that. But we're going to have to accept that it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
So to me, that's been really helpful.
And I do think most of us, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I don't have statistics on this, underestimate the amount of time and sweat equity and even tears, that go into starting something and leading and running a business. The mindset of, well, I just want to work for myself because I won't have a boss. I can control my own schedule. I can go on vacation whenever I want. But the reality is it's 24/7.
Yeah.
You're responsible for the next paycheck of yourself and others. And so that pressure is there. And most CEOs do realize that when they get into it, but maybe they've underestimated. Like you said, they need to make a return trip to accountability, which is another thing that I think is good in these groups. You can't do that necessarily with your employees because you have yes people, or like you said, you can't talk about a layoff or a great quarter. And there's some things you just can't talk about. But you had mentioned to me this book, Lessons from the Edge of Business Disaster, that I think your company published, A Leader's Guide to Survival and Recovery by Vaughn Thurman. And I read through that last night, and it's a great book. CEOs do take these large risks. They want to make a mark. They want to create. They want to build and accomplish, and they're built differently. Entrepreneurs are built differently. And so who really does want to walk around, like you said, saying, hey, my business is failing. I just got sued. Uh, I'm having bank or IRS issues. Um, what is a lesson that you have learned with this kind of authenticity and communication and accountability specifically? You're probably, some people are taking a bigger risk by being more authentic than they are in starting their business.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I do think, well, I maybe three things. And by the way, Von Thurman's book it's an excellent book. It's really a how-to guide on how to get through a business disaster or potential business
Yeah.
disaster, both professionally and personally, right? Both of those things, because those two things they're intertwined, but they are separate, right? We are individuals. Aside from being founders or CEOs, we're individuals apart from that role. But a few things. Number one, I do think it is possible to turn it off. I think that we maybe sometimes fool ourselves into thinking we can't turn it off, but we can. And in my early days, I didn't turn it off. It was 24/7, 365 days a year. In my brain, it was. Looking back, I'm not sure that was always necessary. So I do think there are times, and I think it's super important to do that, whether it's in the evenings, the weekends, whatnot. And when you turn it off, turn your attention to something else.
Yeah.
So I think it's more realistically possible than we like to think that it is. And then in terms of communicating with your staff, your colleagues, because they are your colleagues and all those folks who work for you, like I said earlier, they're your friends. Of course, they're friends. You work with them all day long, right? But you have to be a little careful there in how close those friendships become. But I think that maybe most CEOs err to the side of not being authentic. I think we can be a little more authentic and transparent than we are some of the time. And I think that's it's a tightrope walk. But if you're not transparent at all, you're not authentic, then they're not going to provide the support that you might need. I think sometimes maybe certain staff members in particular might be more willing to help than we think they are, even in terms of providing moral support. So I don't think it's very often that we sit down in a staff meeting and tell our staffs, I'm not doing well right now, and
Right.
these are the reasons why. It's kind of dangerous, right? But I do think on occasions it's important to be more authentic than we are, and somebody's going to step up to the plate and do their best to help you. Thirdly, I do think it's important to admit that you're not the smartest guy in the room all the time.
Yeah.
I think that we like to either think that we are, or we think we need to be the smartest guy in the room. And usually we're not. Just because we founded the business and the CEO of the business does not mean we know all the answers. So I think it's probably a good idea to admit to yourself and to others that you don't have the answers all of the time, and let people get more involved than they are. And again, some folks are going to step up to the table and probably be a much bigger help than you think.
Yeah, a couple things there, and those are three great points. And the first one that came to mind was I went through a 360 process several times. And if you're a small company with 2, 3 people, it doesn't make sense. But my group size was 15 to 20, and I had peers outside of my organization. I had customers, I had suppliers, and getting some honest 360 feedback. And you can use an HR department, or you can outsource that, or there's a lot of ways to do that. But to ask for that candid feedback and then have an action plan once you get it, it's very valuable. And I actually went through the process one time of getting that feedback and then sharing my weak areas with my team. I didn't share it with everybody. There was a trusted confidential leadership team that reported directly to me. And I said, hey, don't go advertise this or put it out on Facebook, but here's the things I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with delegation. I'm struggling with consistent communication. And so I'm going to ask for your help with that. And so there was humility involved with that. And I saw the quickest, most impactful change because I've been managing, leading the same way for a long time and didn't realize I was in a rut. And so once I fessed up a little bit
Yeah.
and said, hey guys, this is what I'm struggling with. And if you see me miss a communication, tell me. I want you to tell me with no retribution. And the no retribution part was tough because you get defensive when someone calls you out,
Right.
and I was no exception. But that is a very valuable process in getting that authentic feedback. And like you said, it's not in every area, and not with every person for certain. The second thing you mentioned was delegation and working with others. And I've done a lot of research in some of the most effective leadership styles that are making their way to the top now are those that are not being not the smartest person in the room, like you mentioned. Shared leadership, collaborative leadership, participative leadership. And that's assigning something to someone else and saying, okay, you got the lead. I'm in the back seat. And so I'm expecting you to lead this effort. And yes, I want to be informed and communicated to, but as a leader, being willing again to recognize that you may have someone in the room or on your team that could do this better. It might be a risk for you to take that. Could be someone outside the company. But again, to practice humility and do that are important. Any other thoughts on that?
Um, no, but I have an unrelated but unrelated thought that I might share.
That's how I
Um,
live, Tom. My life is has nothing to do with, not related, but I'm going to say it anyway.
no, I was going to say I even think that CEOs struggle with taking the problems home, right? We
Mm,
all, CEO or not, when you go home at the end of the day, you're going to bring some of the problems home and talk to spouse or family about it. But I think even in that area, it can really be complex for the CEO who is the owner of the business, because it's almost like with your own staff, you might not want to talk about how well things are going, and you certainly might not want to talk about how poorly things are going, because that's pretty scary to come home and tell your
mhm.
spouse things are not going well and there's no money left in the bank. Um, but so I think even in that area, it's particularly complex for a business owner. Um, I think it's very similar to how you talk to your own team about it. So
Mhm.
that's a kind of a different topic, but I think maybe research backs this up, that business owners have marriage issues as well. And I think especially the ones that it's the same thing. They're not transparent. There's not authenticity, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So I think that you got to get to the point where you're honest when you go home about the problems or the victories that you're having. But at the same time, you don't want to go home and scare everybody. No, no,
right.
nobody likes to hear there's no money left in the bank. They do like to hear there's a lot of money in the bank. But then if you say that, then somebody's going to want to go spend all the money. So
Somebody, whoever
it's
that's.
a rock and a hard place sometimes. But no, I think it's really important that is something I've thought about too. I've thought about writing a book about all this, but I never read about this or hear anybody talk about this. But I think it's another tricky area for CEOs.
Yeah, I know a great publisher if you decide to.
There you go.
I need a commission though.
Oh, okay, that's
Uh,
fine.
yeah, two scriptures popped out at me last night when I was looking at this is Proverbs 15:22. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. And so again, we practice some of this isolation and loneliness ourselves because we think we have it together and we come up with those plans in solitude.
Yeah.
The latest research on leadership is around followership, and the visions that excel the most and are executed most precisely and effectively are those that involve the followers up front. So it's a shared vision. It's not just a one-way down bureaucracy power play where you plaster a vision on the wall. There's some buy-in to that. And so you may get some wisdom from outside. You may get it from your spouse. You may get it from a friend. You may get it from a counselor. I've talked to many CEOs who have a counselor. There's no, or an executive coach. Nothing wrong with that. You're not admitting you're
Yeah.
a failure or weak when you do that. In fact, it's just the opposite. That was one passage. The other was Psalm 121, 1 and 2, that says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. So obviously, as believers, we can maybe get too much advice from peers and friends and family without going to God and His Word and participating in Bible studies or church groups or those type of things. So, any thoughts or wisdom on that or lessons learned?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that those CEOs who pay attention to their spiritual side are going to be stronger, and those who ignore it are going to be weaker. I don't think there's any question about that. And I think those times where I leaned in more and prayed more and read my Bible more, I'm a stronger guy. And when I don't and haven't, I'm a weaker guy, freely willing to admit it. So yeah, I think it's important to be as consistent as you can be about that.
Yeah, that's good. And none of us is imperfect, and we can beat ourselves up um, with that more than anyone. That I'm not doing enough. I'm not praying enough. I'm not reading my Bible enough. But hey, I remember when my teenage daughter, wanted my attention, which was pretty rare. Um, just the fact that she came to me, even though I hadn't seen from her or heard from her in days. Hey, I was there for her, and I wasn't sitting there going, well, maybe I did a little bit. Took you 3 days to talk to me? What you want money? You know. So, but the availability of God is he's always there with grace and not ready to slam us like we feel like we get slammed all the time.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. Hmm.
um, the last part of this book, we just talked about a couple chapters in the book. Chapter 2 was focused on where do leaders get good counsel, and we talked a little bit about planning, packing for the entire trip, dealing with challenges. So yeah, the most powerful section of this book for me personally was his 17 key takeaways, the steps to your own turnaround. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but talks about knowing yourself. He talks about don't go it alone, which we just talked about. Another really good one was investing in yourself. And I know some people do that through coaches and through peer groups, through training, through learning, through rest and relaxation. So those are really really good things. Have you done any of that or any thoughts on investing in
I ne-
yourself?
I need to do more.
Yeah, that's the case for
I do.
most of us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I need to do more for sure. It's
yeah,
something I talk about doing more than I do actually do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Think that's most of us. We talked about this one, be humble and authentic, prepare for the unexpected. There's a really good section, and this book is really focused on if you've been through, a major disaster, you're going through it, you think you're going to go through it, how to survive and recover. So how to prepare for the unexpected. COVID hit a lot of people. And so, maybe better planning would have been necessary or appropriate, but who thinks those type of things are going to happen? So, doing a risk assessment and determining with business disaster recovery, those type of things is where you should focus. Cash, there's some financial advice here on types of lenders, et cetera. Here's another good one: learn to say no. I know I've been in a lot of organizations that don't say no to customers. or maybe they haven't managed their customers, and maybe you need to divorce yourself from some customers,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? And so they could suck up a lot of your time, and maybe they're not your top producer revenue wise or
Yeah,
profit.
very, very true. And I think most CEOs struggle with that idea of saying no. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I
Well,
mean,
you're
you want to say yes for many reasons. Just for the revenue, for one reason. You hate to say no to any revenue, but there's good revenue and bad revenue, right? Yeah.
yeah. And the same thing with profit. It depends how hard earned that profit dollar is, right? If
Right.
you're having to spend 10x more time with a particular customer and you can't sleep at night, well, maybe it's not worth it.
Right.
Um, Delegating, we talked about teaching and training, making incremental improvements. Again, not looking for the big bang, but just doing some small things and prioritizing those. Learning the difference between healthy and unhealthy fear, the fear and pressures that a CEO goes through. This is a big one, I think, too, and it's even more important with a larger company is to know your culture and defend your culture. And so I would say it's even defining your culture. I think there's a lot of value to actually writing a little white paper on what do you want your culture to look like and what are the gaps and have you communicated it and how are you measuring it and instead of just slapping a vision on the wall or expecting people to manage the same way you do. It's not reality.
Exactly. Hmm.
And then his last one was, we talked about it, is look up. Is if your creator created you, he cares. And so the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, not a fear in the sense of he's going to slap me around and discipline me, but James 1:5 says, if you lack wisdom, ask of God and he will give it to you generously without finding fault. So great, great advice in this book. And I appreciate the recommendation and the time you've given us today, Tom. Any other closing thoughts from your end?
My only, I guess, closing thought is let's keep on talking to each other and to other leaders about these issues. It's important to keep talking, not suffer in silence.
Yes,
Do our part to help each other.
agree. So bring all your problems to Tom. If you have any. Find someone. I think you got the message.
There
So,
we go.
Tom, I appreciate you and thanks again for all the work you did on my book and the millions that you and your company have impacted. So I will put a connection here. Make sure we get that. Is there anywhere else you'd want your message shown, LinkedIn or anything else?
I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, so that's probably the best place to find me. And make sure to send me the link to the podcast, and I'll share it with all those great people who follow me.
Will do. All right. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks a lot,
Appreciate
Doug.
you, sir.
God bless. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.